agenda is roll call.
All right, I'll call the roll for you, Sylvia. Arnett. Ms. Bates,
Here.
Dan Bates, Matt Bowman. Rich Gussenberg,
Here.
Ms. Harrigan,
Here.
Mr. Jinks. I know he's there.
Here.
Andrew Martelli,
Here.
Renee Martinez,
Here.
Chuck Neff,
Here.
Sylvia Nichols. Yes,
She is
she's
here.
Kate O'Donnell,
Here.
Jeff Pangaro,
Here.
Tony Perugini,
Here.
and Don Walsh, and we do have a quorum. Okay,
Thank you very much. We'll all rise, please, for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the
The
flag
flag
of the
of the
United States of America and
to the republic
for
which it stands, one nation, under God,
indivisible,
indivisible,
with
with liberty and justice
and
for all.
justice for all. Okay, next item is the approval of minutes of the January 4th meeting. You've all received them from Marilyn. Hopefully you've all had a chance to review them. Does anyone have any comments, questions, or concerns?
we need a motion on the floor first, Jen.
Right, thank you.
Motion to approve the minutes.
Thank you, Jeff.
Yeah.
Second.
Okay, anything else? Anyone have any questions? All in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Anyone abstain or against? Okay,
I'm abstaining because I was not attending last meeting.
okay, thank you, Renee. Okay, I believe the motion passed. It's hard to count hands that fast, but I think we're good. Next item is the review of the scenario details. That is going to be the majority of the meeting this evening. I would like to do a deep dive into all of the options. We can discuss them and get some feedback. We will have a chance for everyone to make comments on all of the options after we go through them. I'd like to try to keep it short and sweet if possible, but I definitely want to be able to have everyone say whatever concerns or questions that they have. But I'd like to try to limit the back and forth debating. I think we're going to try to get through it because if all 13 of us comment on all of the options, we're going to be here all night. So please try to have your points concise, and if they've already been mentioned, we can probably just move on. But that's the goal for tonight, is to get out of here before midnight would be nice. So to get everybody caught up, I appreciate everyone's flexibility over the last few weeks with all of the emails that were going around. We were trying to shift the schedule a little bit to try to have this meeting a little bit earlier. And that's because about 2 weeks ago, maybe 10 days ago or so, we started doing some timeline development with Colliers on this. And it was becoming evident that we had some questions and some concerns about some of the plans that we needed to talk through. So that's why we're doing this tonight. We weren't able to get a meeting earlier. So unfortunately, we had to wait until tonight to do it. But because of that, we had some other meetings with the leadership teams, the chairperson of the town council, the chairperson of the Board of Ed, just to kind of figure out how to expedite this work, how to make sure that we're still meeting our deadlines, setting expectations, and things of that nature. So that's why you all received a flurry of emails asking when we could meet, if we could meet earlier, if we could meet again. And we came up with a general plan to try to keep us on track. We're meeting tonight to talk about the options. We're going to go through them in detail, as I said, and at the end of this meeting, hopefully have a concise number of options with a good plan as to what they actually are. Jim Jascott is still reviewing the financial pieces of this, and he does not have that report for us tonight. But that's why we're going to be meeting on the 27th. We're giving him an extra week to get everything together, and we're going to fit a meeting in between our regular meetings on the 27th to try to keep us on track. He's going to have that report for us on the 27th. We'll go through all the financial details at that meeting. And then I am planning on holding our regular meeting again on February 1st. And that meeting will be to review any outstanding issues, anything that comes out of the meeting on the 27th that we need to research, we'll review on the 1st. But that gets us back on track again to be able to proceed and use the month of February to develop that final option, have like 1 or 2 options that we really nail down as far as the plan, the cost, the impact of the town, and all of that. And then the plan is that on March 1st, we'll be doing a presentation to the Town Council and the Board of Ed with what our recommendation is. So with all of that, that's kind of what happened in the last 2 weeks. And we're going to push forward tonight and go through these options. That is item 4A on our agenda. Does anyone have any questions before I move on to that? Yes, Mr. Bowman.
Why are we rushing through this when it's very obvious that we need extra time? And why not just ask the town council for additional time so that we may do our due diligence on all the proposals that have been put forth? At this point, we haven't even located a site for whether it be a high school, a middle school, or an elementary school. And we seem to be rushing this thing when there's no need to rush. We want to get this right. We want to do it right the first time. And I'm sure that there are members of the town council here that could speak, and I've spoken to some of the other members of the town council. They would have no problem whatsoever in granting us an extension instead of us trying to rush to a March 1st deadline that again, we have no site in mind for anything. We also, Chuck had mentioned very, very early on in our meetings that when they do their due diligence on a site, they want to do borings and things like that to see exactly what they're up against when they're preparing their cost analysis, so that their numbers are accurate. And we obviously have no site, so they can't do that in preparation for our final proposal to the town council. I don't think we should rush things. I think we should ask the town council for additional time, and I'm sure they'd be more than happy to give it to us. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. I don't feel like we're rushing things. I think we are doing our due diligence, and that's what we're doing tonight. So we're going through the options. If it becomes apparent later on down the road that we need to look for an extension, perhaps we could discuss that. But we are moving along at a very quick pace for sure. But we are doing our due diligence. We are vetting all of the options. We have had executive discussions, executive meeting discussions with this entire group about locations at a very high level, but we are looking into that. So I still feel that we can meet this deadline and still have a feasible, well thought out, planned out recommendation. There is work that will need to be done throughout the month of March to refine it and develop it and answer questions from the town council and the Board of Ed to make sure that we're meeting everyone's needs, but that will come in time. So I'm willing to revisit that on a regular basis. We can discuss it to see if everyone feels that we need to have an extension, but at this point, I don't feel it's necessary. Anyone else? Yes, Kate.
I also had a concern about the property, but mine is more of like a question to our town councilors, because I know when you're looking at a new site and doing a brownfield study and looking at the watershed, like there's a lot of steps that have to go through, and I don't have that experience. So I would like to ask our town councilors if they have information about all the steps that would have to go through to approve a piece of land, because I have that same concern, but I'm hoping that someone on this committee might be able to inform us about if we do need to extend our timeline, what does that timeline look like in order to get a property approved and acquired?
Yep, and I don't know if that's really the town council to answer. Obviously, they can if they want to, but I believe that's why we have Colliers here. They've been through this process a number of times, and Chuck, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe they'll be leading us through this process and helping us along every step of the way.
I think Don Walsh, Don, I think you might have raised your hand.
Sorry, I missed that.
I don't know. I might have missed.
Yeah, I did.
Maybe give chance first.
That's okay. That's okay. I was just going to answer that. No, we do not have all that information, Kate. Obviously, it's something that Colliers would have to give to us. And, I don't think, I'm speaking for myself, but I don't think the town council would have an issue if we had to delay this, because at the end of the day, we all want to get it right. And I think if we don't, and I understand where you're coming from, Jen. We don't know yet if we have to delay it. I think we have to go through this steps, and we may find by the 27th or the 1st, we're not going to make the March 1st. And I don't think that would be an issue. But, you know, um, I'm speaking for myself, but I would assume that the other counselors all feel the same way, that they want to make sure we get this right and not rush it. So that's my 2 cents on that.
Okay.
So Chuck, what does that timeline generally look like?
Yeah, so one of the major factors, and I think the assumptions that we've had so far for the sites with that, they would be property that's already owned by the town. If you already own it, obviously, you don't have to purchase it and so forth. So they're I think we can all understand that. Typically, when we're going to a new site, a couple of the major points, and I think Matt Bowman mentioned, we recommend a preliminary geotechnical boring plan. What that consists of is hiring a geotechnical firm. There's a few in Connecticut that are very prominent, very experienced throughout the state. We would solicit it. I'd have to check on the procurement of professional services, but either multiple quotes. They go out on a proposed site or sites and typically do anywhere 4 or 5, maybe 6 borings, because what we want to find out is, do we have ledge on the site? Are there unsuitable, there are fines like clay that would not be suitable for supporting a structure, or if we had to make supplements to it. Basically getting a preliminary idea of what's in the ground, because obviously we can't see that. That's one aspect. That takes a couple of weeks. That's not a long time frame. And we wouldn't recommend doing it yet until you've really settled on a preferred scenario. To do it now might be a little bit premature, but once you look at the financial impact that Jim Jascott's working on, and get a better idea, we would recommend that, as that's the phase 3. If anybody remembers the outline, we're still kind of in phase 2. This would be the phase 3. So the preliminary geotechnical borings, phase 1 environmental site assessment. For those who might not know what that is essentially, it's a review of the historical use of the site. It's also looking at for any endangered species, review of wetlands, and really at a high level, 30,000 foot level review of the site to see if is there any red flags out there that we're not aware of. Again, wetlands, endangered species is one of them. Floodplains, stuff like that. We'd want to look at to see if there's any what we call budget busters, if anything that's going to really impact your budget for that. And then again, the wetlands. If there's an existing building we're doing a renovation or tearing one down, we would want to do some preliminary hazardous materials investigations, visual inspections for, as well as looking at HERA reports, the asbestos reports that the Board of Ed has on file. All those can typically occur within about a 2-month period, maybe 2.5 months, depending how fast we move. The longest one's the phase 1 environmental site assessment. If that was to identify any concerns, whether from a former use, say farmland, potentially polluted soils due to pesticides, herbicides, they might recommend a phase 2, and then we'd have to discuss, do we want to do the phase 2? And typically what that entails could entail taking some samples on the site and seeing exactly what those materials are. Examples of that would be in South Windsor, we had dieldrin on a site where it exceeded what they call exposure criteria. And so we had to basically mitigate that on site and pile it up, cover it with 2 feet of dirt, basically, so that we couldn't access it. Children couldn't touch it, the public, et cetera. But those are some of those studies that we would recommend early once you decide what scenario you want to go with. And again, that's probably a couple months 2 to 3 months timeframe.
Okay, thank you. And additionally, we do have a June 30th date of submitting our grant to the state, and that can't be moved. So the plan that we are marching to is to make sure that we meet that date. And getting there means that we would like to present to the Board of Ed and the Town Council on March 1st, so that they have plenty of time to review everything and prepare for that June 30th deadline for the state.
Yeah, and
Sorry, go
Jen,
ahead.
expand upon that. Putting forth that application as part of that are resolutions and motions and approvals from Board of Ed, Town Council that take weeks to prepare. So ed specs, for example, there's typically a first reading and a second reading once they're prepared. So that's a month in itself. And then the minutes have to be prepared and certified, and that gets submitted with the application. So when you back out all that time, it's not like we can wait until June 1st to do it. Those really have to start mid-April, May 1st at the very latest in order to get them in on time. And then sometimes you may run up against budget season and other meetings that Town Council might be preoccupied with.
Right. And the plan was that we're not going to have an official final plan as of March 1st. It's our recommendation to the Town Council on March 1st, where we're then going to have time to be able to go back and forth, answer questions, and make changes as necessary, if necessary. Chuck, did I see your hand earlier? Chuck Neth?
Yeah, I was just gonna say what we're presenting to the town is a recommendation, which is really just a logistics plan, not necessarily we want to build this building here. So the details but to Matt's point, I think if we're rushing to put together a plan by March 1st that we don't believe is the best plan and fully vetted out and everything, then it wouldn't make sense to, try and hit that date. So I think as we kind of talk through the scenarios, kind of see where we're at, if we need to do more work and we need to push that date, it doesn't make sense to put together a plan that we, don't all believe in, or, majority believe in, just to hit a date.
Thank you. Sylvia, did you have something?
Just very quickly, I think that makes sense. We need to make sure it's right. I agree with John that the council would like to see it moved on quickly and with all due diligence and with all of the T's crossed and the I's dotted. But if we get to the point where we feel we need more time, we would all probably support an extension of time. It wouldn't be the preference, but if it's the right thing to do, we would not object to that. That's just my feeling.
Thank you for your input. Again, that doesn't really delay the June 30th deadline that we're trying to get to either, but I appreciate that we may have additional time before we go to the Town Council before that. But I would like to not take away time from the other end. If we were to push it to even say April 1st, that leaves us a month short for preparing for that June 30th date.
But to my point, Jen, is if we can't get that all done by June 30th, I think the council would say, to get it right, we may need to prove it, not put in that application by June 1st. I just want to make sure that we're aware that there's a possibility that if we can't get all the work done, we do have the option to move it up and have a special referendum after the election. So, I mean, this is not an end all be all. That is our goal. That's what I would like to see happen, is to get it done by June 1st, but only if we've fully vetted all of the scenarios. I believe it can be done if we all pay attention to the jobs that we need to do. But I know the council would say, don't leave a stone unturned in the interest of hurrying up to get it done by June 1st.
Okay. Chuck Warrington, can you just give me some background on if we do miss that June 30th date, what is our next opportunity to submit something to the state? Would it be the next June 30th?
That is correct. The deadline is always a June 30th.
Just want to make sure.
Yeah, and the project starts in earnest. Any project starts in earnest on the fund when you pass the funding, because between June 30th and say November 2nd, you can't do anything. None of that activity would be eligible. The state says pre-referendum, it's not reimbursable. So you really don't start until then. So you could, still hold a referendum, say November, if you wish to start the process and then submit an application in June 30th, 2022. The only thing being is you are somewhat at risk of not knowing if you're going to get on the have your grant application accepted, and you're going through about almost a year's worth of effort before that December 2022 priority list comes out. So once you're on the list, you're pretty much going to get a grant commitment. I've never seen one not funded that's been on the list. Knock on wood. But what happens now, you're paying for those architectural fees for a year. And then what it does, it ultimately pushes out your ability to submit reimbursement. This case would be 2023, summer 2023 timeframe for it. So all it does is really pushes the grant application, the grant commitment process and reimbursement out a year. And and that's why this is why we have conversations with the state to get an idea of, are they on board with it? Because if they say, hey, we're not on board with it, obviously you're not going to move forward with it, and you don't want to risk spending that money.
Okay, thank you. Chuck Neff, is that a finger up?
Yeah, real quick, Chuck. In terms of dollars, what is the risk that you're running in that year that you're not getting reimbursement?
Let me just I could pull that up real quick, Chuck. Just looking at the if we're looking at the budgets here, primarily architectural fees, Chuck, in the design, probably I'm looking at probably 50-60% of those fees. And I'm just looking at, the new elementary school, the budget that we had, and the fees were just shy of 3 million, 2.75 million. So you're probably maybe $1.5 million in architectural fees, and then maybe some other miscellaneous for any environmental fees for that. Hopefully if we're involved, there'd be some there. So you're potentially, and I'm ballparking here, Chuck, maybe $2 million possibly.
Thank you.
That's a real back of a napkin guesstimate.
Yes, Matt.
I just want a quick clarification. We are going to forward to the town council a proposal for a scenario that we've accepted as a committee without a site.
We have discussed possibilities of sites. We can include that possibility in our plan if that's the option that we end up going with. But that is something that we can discuss over the next few weeks as we refine these options.
I just want a clarification. So we are going to propose a scenario with a site. Is that correct?
I can't answer that question right now. We will determine that. We will determine that as a group.
Thank you.
I don't see any other hands. One final note, though, I think it would be a complete disservice to the town if we were to miss this June 30th date. I believe we have all been doing a great deal of work. We have had dozens of options, revisions of options, subsets of options that we have vetted, that we have discussed, and we have turned over every stone that we can think of. I've received emails from people saying, what about this option? We've researched things, we've tried to consolidate, we've tried to move things around. Based on the numbers, we are doing the absolute best that we can. If we were to miss this June 30th date, I think it would be incredibly irresponsible of this group. So I'm going to continue marching towards that date of March 1st of having a recommendation to the town council so that we can do something for this town. I do not think delaying it is an option. We need to move forward, and we are not rushing this. We are spending tonight going through all of these options and discussing all of them. Okay, moving on. Agenda item number 4B is the timelines. This is where we're going to get into it. Chuck Neff is going to take over for the first option, and he will walk you through the logistics of the scenario, and then everyone will have a chance to comment and provide feedback, and we will have the opportunity to make adjustments to this as needed or remove it from the list if needed as well. So that's the goal tonight, is to go through it and make sure we all understand what it entails, answer some questions, determine whether or not it's feasible, and then move forward. One of the big questions that we're going to ask tonight of all of us is whether or not we are comfortable with renovating schools while children are in this space, occupied renovations. That's going to come up a number of times, and we need to think about whether or not we're comfortable with that and what the possibility is for keeping the kids safe in a building that's being constructed. So keep that in mind as we go through these options, and we'll discuss them as we get there. Chuck, go ahead.
Got it. So let me share my screen, I guess. You guys got my Excel sheet here, yes?
We can see it.
So this is the sheet that Jen had set around, kind of summarizing the timelines, pros, cons that we had for previous. So again, on phase 1 of 1A Reno, phase 1 would include building a new K through 6 elementary school. We would move Darcy pre-K to Highland. We would move the Darcy kindergarten to Doolittle. The Humiston and Alt School and Board of Ed offices would be moved to a leased space. And then we would close Darcy, Chapman, and Humiston in this case. And we would redistrict to balance the elementary enrollment. That would be all of phase 1. In phase 2, it'd be renovate Doolittle and Norton. Phase 3, renovate Dodd and Highland. And then in phase 4, it would be renovate the high school. So again, these phases are just based on the timelines that Colliers had put together. It's just summarized here. And just some notes, I guess, on the scenarios themselves. So pro would be, addressing the elementary enrollment in phase 1. And it eliminates some planned capital improvement projects at Humiston and Chapman. So you have the cost avoidance there. Some notes, I guess, cons written here. It consolidates only Darcy as far as the schools. Chapman is really replaced with a new elementary school, and then the Humiston is replaced with a leased space. So you're really only closing Darcy in this scenario. The renovation of all the other schools based on when they take place would be done while they are occupied. So again, that may be longer construction time, student safety concerns, and there's been some concern of a poor learning environment. Again, these are all things we can kind of talk through. This is just high level notes, I guess. And then it's phase dependent to achieve modernization of multiple schools. So what that's driving at is in phase 1, we're really only modernizing the new K through 6 elementary school that would be replacing Chapman, and modernization of the other schools is dependent on follow-up referendums. So I guess the goal would be, does anybody have any additional comments on kind of the timelines here? Any other issues to maybe think through as a group? Kind of summarize where we're at on scenario 1A as far as the timelines.
Yeah, Chuck.
Yeah, go ahead, Jim. I'm going to stop sharing just so I can see everybody because I can't see everybody.
Okay. So one of the questions I've always kind of had about this particular scenario is obviously if we're, the question came up earlier about a site. I mean, we've talked about this Chapman site being, probably the only school site in town where you could be building a new school on the same site and then basically tear down the old school when you're done. So I just want to sort of clarify with this scenario, are we stipulating that the new Chapman school would be on the same site? Because that obviously makes a difference between, it makes a pretty significant difference in our decision making, I think, if we're talking about a whole new site for Chapman or if we're going to just build the school on the same property.
Yeah, I'll let Colliers answer that because I'm not sure based on the size of what this one would be if it fits in the same spot.
Yeah, no, our assumption is that a new elementary school would be constructed on a new site. Because it's 700 students, we would need at least, I'm thinking of the guidelines, I think it's 10 acres plus 1 for every 100. ideally we'd be looking at a roughly 15 to 18 acre site. We couldn't build that size school at Chapman while it's occupied, based upon the size that we've seen preliminary. We obviously haven't studied or laid out a specific floor plan, but to build there while it's occupied for that size school, we think wouldn't be feasible. So we would assume a separate site.
And the 700 students school size is
Amy,
twice
bring
what
that.
it's twice what the current Chapman school is, right?
Yeah, let me, I just had that budget up
Well, Chuck's looking for that. Does anybody else have any other? Yeah, go ahead, Rich.
The assumption has always been that we would go through each of the elementary, middle, and then high school. And I'm not certain that we should automatically assume that. When I look at buildings, for instance, we're doing a renovation of Humiston, or not Humiston, of Highland, before the high school. And the high school to me is a school that requires more needs. And so I would recommend that as we're looking at these phases, I have no problem at all with phase one on this. But before I would go in and do, renovations on Dodd and Highland, I'd be looking at potential doing the high school much earlier. And then I would make the same comment that I've made earlier, that I think that doing a renovation of the high school while 1,300 kids are in that building will prove to be an extremely expensive and difficult process, and that we ought to be doing an analysis of what it would cost to build a new high school on the same property versus doing a complete renovation of the present school.
Thank you, Rich. I think that's a point, Chuck, you had kind of talked about in some of the meetings is, these are going to be evolving scenarios that are really phase one is what it is. And then, phase 2 through 4 may evolve as you kind of get into the construction and look at this later on down the road. Is that accurate?
Yeah, if I could answer Jim Jenks' question first. So an elementary school with a population of 700, and that might vary a little bit, approximately 100,000 square feet. We have the low end that would meet the space standard would be 94,000 square feet. And the final programming, we could potentially go up to 103,000. So you're between, in that high 90,000 square foot range for that size of a school, just to answer that.
Okay.
I know
For that, you were saying we needed 10 to 15 acres.
Yeah, the state of Connecticut, and that's a guideline, Jim. The state of Connecticut published some design guidelines, and at the elementary school level, they recommend 10 acres plus one for every additional 100 students. Now, that's not it's not a requirement. I mean, you can do them on smaller sites, but when the key thing is when you start taking into account parent drop off, bus drop off in the newer schools, vehicular and pedestrian circulation playgrounds take up a lot more room than some of your current schools would take. So that's just a guideline and a recommendation.
Gotcha. And then to Rich's question about evolution of the scenarios, and I believe he's saying, phase 4 is renovate the high school. Would it be possible?
Yeah,
Move
I
that around
think
to new high school
absolutely.
in phase 2, et cetera.
Yeah, I mean, whether it's I think the reality of whether it's a renovation or new, I think that sounds like it's kind of up for discussion. In that scenario, because of the size of that type of a building in the existing parcel, we would certainly recommend bringing on an architectural design team to study that really further, to lay it out and see what's really feasible, because to just do it we can estimate, give you costs. However, the logistics in the site and where we build it and is it feasible, that would require some more effort that would warrant bringing on a team.
Got it.
but they can't switch in a mix. It's really up to obviously the town. If you know, the decision is, okay, we've addressed the amount of space available for, say, the elementary schools, and you redistricted and you're okay. Okay, now then, you know, in our opinion, then we can start looking at physical needs and go, who has the worst needs? Maybe it is high school. And if that's what you decide, you can certainly move that. All these puzzle pieces can get intermixed in the scenarios.
Well, that's what I was
Yeah.
hoping.
Yeah, I think so. I think you're right on, Reg.
Gotcha. Is there any other comments on 1A? Go ahead, Ann.
Yeah, I just want to quickly say, we found out 3 years ago that it probably is possible to construct a new construction on the same site and then move the high school kids over into the new building and then demolish the old building. So there is space there to be able to do that if
Okay.
you're creative with it.
God, thank you, Ann. Tony, did I see your hand go up there?
Yeah, no, I just want to add that one of the cons is that if we lease space for Humiston as part of that first phase, it's a cost we're taking on that we don't have today. And I'm not sure if the operating cost we incur today would cover that lease. But the intangible to that is we'd be out of Humiston and in a more ADA compliant and friendly location. So I know our students, so I just want to point that stuff out. But if we did that option, hopefully the operating savings will cover the lease, but I'm skeptical.
But it's also cost avoidance from all the work that may need to be done to Humiston.
Any of the capital projects, yeah, about 3
Right.
or 4 million. Yep.
Go ahead, Don.
Are we just going to do the analysis on phase one of a scenario, not look at the other costs, or are we going to look at the costs? Because I was just wondering, you know, if building a new elementary school, say, is $100 million, and you know, a reno for one of those schools might be 35 million, would we be looking at that and saying, okay, well, we can do, maybe we should go with the 135, or are we just going to be looking at the costs for phase one of each scenario?
Chuck, go ahead. How did we settle on that, I guess, with
Yeah, so based upon
with
the
Jim?
preliminary rankings in our last meeting, and there was those top, let's say like 1A, 2A, 2B. What we've done is we've already developed the cost for each of the projects, and over those, I'll say the last month, we developed, we did the cash flows that extracted the entire scenario out. If you were to look at the file, Jim Jenks's, we go out to almost 2034 with cash flow with these. So it looks at all of the projects for 1A, 2A, and 2B based upon the preliminary rankings. And as a result of doing those cash flows, and part of the background of this is in order for us to do a cash flow, we need some type of a schedule. We need an assumed schedule so we can know when are we hitting construction for a specific phase, because that borrowing bumps up your expenses, obviously bump up in construction. So we're able, you know, also your spreadsheets are, we have 350 rows and it goes out 15 years. So for all those, this discussion kind of grew out of doing that exercise prior to the cash flow.
Got it. Does that answer your question there? Yeah. Is there anybody else on 1A stuff? Go ahead, Matt.
I'm going to ask again, and I asked the question the first time. Where are we going to build the elementary school? Where, what property, where? And I don't want anyone hiding behind executive session because we're talking about town-owned properties only. And the people in this community have the right to know what parcels we're thinking about to put a school on. Thank you.
Jen, Chuck, any comment on that? I would just say that, you know, we don't know what property. It's going to be a North End school in this case. It would be replacing the Chapman district, and schools would be redistricted. And we don't know where that property is right now, but, You guys want to add anything to that?
If this is the option that we end up going with, that is going to be part of the development of this option that we're going to go through in the month of February and March, and we will look into it at that time.
Very good. Is there anything else on
This-
option 1A? Go ahead, Jim.
Should we talk about the question that Jen had earlier that we were going to have to discuss throughout the night as far as renovating the schools while the kids are in the schools?
I think that's a overarching question for all of the scenarios because you'll see it comes up on most of
Yeah.
them. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was just going to say that, I mean, I don't mind saying that I think it's be very difficult to renovate the schools with the kids in the schools. I mean, we have space issues now. It's hard to see how we would be able to kind of move kids within the school in a growing school population to the point that we can actually be renovating the school at the same time. But that aside, it just seems like it'd be obviously a detriment to the kind of learning environment and the other kind of hassles involved in that as far as the school programming goes. And I think in another meeting, Chuck, I think you had mentioned, Chuck Morrington had mentioned that in some districts where they do this, they'll have to sort of add on to the school first and then do the renovation or something. I don't know if Chuck, if you want to maybe speak to that in some places where you've seen that, but in general, I'm against the idea of renovating while the kids are there.
Yeah, yeah, definitely, Jim. We've definitely seen it. And this is, again, these topics kind of came about as a result of doing these schedules. And when we're overlapping them, you have quite a few schedules, and we're already looking out 12, 13 years. But when we're looking, okay, we build a new elementary school, we redistrict, there isn't any swing space per se. So for example, let alone swing space and construction logistics for a contractor. Norton, for example, small site. Yeah, there's a field in the back, but access to that is extremely tight, very, very tight, just from a construction point of view. Some of the districts that we've done it in, Stonington, Connecticut, where they did 2 schools, we did 2. They actually had 3 elementary schools. They redistricted down to 2. They built additions that could support their existing population. We moved them into the new addition, renovated the existing and at both, and then we redistrict afterwards. We had enough room to do so. They kind of had a declining population in that one as well. But yeah, major addition there. I think it was probably 40,000 square feet addition on those. The other ones are in Fairfield, Connecticut. Theirs are slightly different. They'll do, most of them have been about maybe a 5 or 6 classroom addition. One might have been a music room that we use for a classroom temporarily, where we can use that for the swing space and kind of shuffle them around as we go and take major portions or wings of these buildings, spring of a year, fall of a year, over the summer. The other challenge is Department of Public Health we cannot abate at the elementary school level while kids are in class. It has to happen during the summertime. Because even if they did second shift, taking the air samples, if there was a release, for some reason plastic got cut and there was a release, you'd have to stay out of school for that next day. So they don't do it during the summer. High school's slightly different. We still expedite testing and the turnaround samples. I think Kate might add a question.
Yeah, Kate, did you have a comment on 1A and students and renovation?
Yeah, I had a question about swing space first. We had talked prior about using Chapman or Darcy as swing space. That's no longer an option now? Can you explain to me why that's not an option?
Yeah, so Chapman, looking at your enrollments in Norton and Doolittle, for example, they exceed the capacity at Chapman. If we added, I think we would have to consider adding portables to those, to that school, or increasing the capacity to agree. We looked at what those were. That's one factor. The other one is it also comes in a timeline where you do one at a time, or do you do them both at the same time? Like, you know, if you were to do Norton and Doolittle in the same construction period, you know, that's always a discussion too, of do you do one and one, or do you both at the same time? But the bottom line is the capacity of Chapman, based upon what Malone and McBroom have given us, doesn't have enough room for those two schools. It's certainly not Highland. I think we all know that already.
Yeah, okay. And also, you know, in the district where I am, we did an 11 school renovation.
Mm-hmm.
And
Big one, yeah.
it was safe for the kids. It was a good learning environment. Like it doesn't have to be the worst case scenario that I think we're kind of painting here. The construction company was very good about really doing a hardcore press when the students were out of school and shutting off areas when the kids weren't. Like no one ever felt unsafe. We didn't have any issues with, you know, kids getting sick or being in like I really think that it can be managed by a construction company. You know, if we did it with 11 schools, I can see how we could do it with 2. So I think it is possible, and I wouldn't just discount this because of something that we're afraid might happen.
I agree with you, Kate. It's 100% possible. What's key is in these cases, we typically hire a construction manager, and certainly the ones that we work with are fully capable of this. It all comes down to communication, like any other project of, you know, the ownership team, the principal, the construction manager. You know, if we're involved, you know, we have weekly, bi-weekly meetings. There's a phasing plan that's set up. We walk it through with the administration. We show here's where the barriers are going to be for phase 1. This is where the, you know, the workers will come in. This is where the students will come in. We work with the fire marshal, the building official, make sure all that is safe. It's absolutely doable. It's a challenge. It's really a matter of philosophy in the community. Some communities, you know, parents are like, I don't want my child in a construction, you know, environment. That's really, I think, the discussion there, Kate, is more philosophically. Do you want to deal with that? Can it happen? Sure. Anything can happen, but it might lengthen the construction a little bit. So a little bit of, there's some general conditions per month, you know, that'll occur, but it can't happen. Yes. I think you have a great point there.
All right, thanks, Chuck, Kate. Is there anything else on phase or scenario 1A? Anybody? I would just give my opinion on scenario 1A is if you're looking at it as I think the big thing is you're really only touching the one school district in the phase 1. And in my opinion, I don't think that's fair if we're looking at school modernization as a whole. If we could, you know, do more in phase 1 and, you know, help more of the school buildings out, I think it would be better. But again, that's my opinion on it. All right. We can move on to the 1A CIP. It's very similar as far as timelines. Obviously, with the difference being the capital improvement projects could be completed over time. They're not necessarily a strict phase. They would be kind of completed throughout, but there's no major logistical difference unless I'm missing anything there. Did anybody have any thoughts, I guess, on the CIP portion of scenario 1A?
Rich has something.
Go ahead, Rich, sorry.
Yeah, quick question for Chuck. As we look at the buildings, are there some schools that seem to be more logically done with a CIP and some that more logically require a full renovation? So for instance, I'm thinking of Highland School, which appeared to be in pretty good shape when I walked through, that maybe you could, you know, do CIP with, but maybe another school like Norton that you look at. So we're looking at it as all or nothing in these two scenarios, but is there a combination there that makes sense?
Yeah, no, Rich, great point there. Definitely Highland. I think anybody who's walked through Highland, even though it's still 50 years old, it's in great condition. That one seems, and I won't claim to be an expert in each of the schools and the conditions. We only walked through them and looked at the reports, but Highland does seem to be in better condition in our cash flows that we provide to Jim. We did make Highland a CIP, recommended a CIP just because your costs were just going up and up and up and up. I mean, to renovate all these schools, you're getting to be a big ticket. So we had recommended in these doing a CIP in the cash flow analysis just as a placeholder. You can always change it. But certainly, I think the Norton, because there are some portables there, you know, and talking with the district, and I think Norton and probably Doolittle, they're probably more prone to maybe a renovation versus a CIP. But I think, as we said, through all of these, as you progress through the program, whatever ends up being, things are going to shift and things, you know, priorities might change through time, and you might, you know, you might change things as you go along, depending on how, you know, different factors.
Mhm. I'm also thinking of disruption too. School like Highland, if you were doing CIP, you could largely come in the summertime, replace all the windows, you know, some work like that, finish it up in a 2-month period of time, and get out of there rather than, you know.
CIP is typically summer slammers, kind of like what Kate was alluding to.
Right.
You know, the summers they ramp up full bore, they take over the entire building. You know, it's where they're taking ceilings out in common spaces, administration areas. You know, that's typical for those summer slammers. But CIP similar, where you're starting early, you're procuring your materials, and you know, in the late winter, early spring, have it ready to go. So come June 20th, whenever you're out of school, they're taking that building over and you know, going like crazy.
Yeah, so that's a real strength. And Highland is one. I don't know, possibly Doolittle, possibly Dot. I don't know. That's something that I would defer to you.
Got it.
Good point.
Anything else on the 1A scenarios?
I'd like to suggest possibly making some decisions tonight as far as how to kind of reduce the number of options. We have 1A CIP and 1A Reno, which are very similar in the logistics of them. However, we are already discussing the possibility of doing Highland as a CIP and the rest of them as a renovation, which really combines those two options. So in order to kind of streamline this a little bit and eliminate some options, can we discuss the possibility of combining these two, making a decision and saying we just have option 1A at this point, and it includes CIP at Highland and renovation at the other schools? Is that something we're all in agreement with?
I would just ask Chuck if there's any other schools you could do a CIP on.
I think that's really subjective, and we'd want to do a little deeper dive in each of the schools,
Okay.
Rich, to give it due justice. But I think for kind of going back to what Jenna was recommending, you know, we'd incorporate that in the cash flows. Because it's easy to take a project that's a renovation and say you're going to do CIP with some assumed values, and that happens over a period of time. There's no real schedule to it like a renovation project. So for worst case scenarios, we did those, you know, Norton and Doolittle as renovations, and gave those to Jim Jascott kind of as a worst case, so he can evaluate the impact on a worst case basis, knowing, okay, hey, if you don't spend as much, it's gonna get less, and kind of see what he comes up with next week for those, and go from there if we need to do, you know, a revised cash flow on those. So, but I think on a case by case basis, Rich, is what I would recommend before we, you know, recommend that.
I would agree to combining them though.
Jen, I would go one step further even and see if there was anyone against just standing on the option or the scenario as the phase 1 and let the phase 2 through 4 kind of develop itself. And it's kind of the point Rich made earlier is we're renovating the high school in phase 4. I don't think we should be married to a strict phase 1 through 4 scenario that's shown here versus phase 1 is, you know, build the new K through 6 elementary school, and we're going to address the other schools in this manner. We just don't know which order we're going to address it in, and that's kind of to be determined down the road with, you know, further committee work at the town level. That's how I look at it. But
I'd
go ahead.
be in support of that.
Go ahead, Renee. You got a comment?
Yeah, so I agree with what you're saying, Chuck. And also, I think that in order to choose between renovations and CIP, as Chuck Warrington was saying earlier, really you need to do a deep dive at the school and look at the systems closely. That's a very detailed study, and I've done those before, and that's really a deep dive that I think it's outside of what we're trying to accomplish here. So we're looking at things at a macro level. I think trying to distinguish between CIP and a full renovation, we will not be able to get to that level of accuracy here. And I think that even and I think the argument in favor of CIP, has a couple issues. One, what is the window of what is the time window that our analysis need to be based on? And I think we discussed that at the subcommittee meetings a couple times. If we look at a window of 10, 15 years, perhaps all the CIPs will actually add up to a renovation at the end of that time period. The second argument is that you're less likely to get any reimbursement with CIPs. So you're leaving some money on the table there. So I think for purposes of analysis, I am in favor of combining it and perhaps using the higher ticket price of a renovation as a cost
Baseline.
for the analysis. Yes.
Yep. Thank you, Renee. Go ahead, Matt, and then Jim, I see you're up there.
We are only proposing one scenario to the town, which will go out to referendum. Therefore, as much as we discussed phase 2, phase 3, phase 4, really the only thing that's going to the town council is the first phase, and the first phase will be decided on by the voters. Any other phases would then have to be reanalyzed and put out back to referendum to the voters. So we're really just working on one phase, correct?
Well, what we're presenting to the town is a recommendation for addressing the schools as a whole. So they wanted a holistic plan that is built on one another, not necessarily just address this school in phase 1. It's part of a bigger plan. So yes, the referendum would only cover the phase 1, but it's got to be a part of a bigger plan to address school modernization as a whole. That's what we owe the town as our charge. Jim, did you have something?
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify. I guess maybe I'm making the wrong assumption. I thought that with renovating schools, we were going to be somewhat addressing our space needs as well. And CIP, we're not really addressing space needs. Can someone kind of answer that for me? With renovation, we are going to be addressing some of the space needs by renovating, right?
So we'd actually talk about that in scenario 5, but Chuck, you want to go ahead and address that now, renovation and space?
Yeah. So CIP, correct. You're typically the CIPs are, and I think we've heard from, been like window replacement, maybe roof replacement, mechanical upgrades. They're typically not necessarily additions or large structural modifications to a building in general.
Right.
Where a renovation is going to take into, okay, what is the space? We're going to be looking at what's the enrollment, what's your existing square footage, does it meet the educational specifications for that specific one? So where I think this kind of ties in, I think someone might have suggested when looking at these and the recommendations for phase 1 of, whatever you recommend for phase 1, it shouldn't have to be dependent upon subsequent phases for that to be successful, I guess. So if you vote for phase 1 and phase 2 goes a referendum, doesn't pass, you're not dealing with that space issue. So, some of the options I think will address the space issue at phase 1. Now it's a matter, you have enough space, but maybe are they modernized? That's, I think the question is enough space versus now modernizing those spaces. And I think some of these options do that and some of them may not.
Can I add to
Yeah.
that, Jim? Just because we do a renovation doesn't mean it necessarily addresses all the space issues that we have at that particular school. It could possibly add a little bit of room, but a renovation won't necessarily fix any capacity issues.
Okay.
That's why we're
Um,
building a 700 student school, because we're picking up extra enrollment growth there.
Right.
Yeah, and this one, you're building it larger, but there may be some, like say at Highland, where it's still, there might be a need for a small addition, like one classroom or something there, or just reprogramming. And that's where the deeper dive into that in the ed spec and what the programming would be, you know, and the capacities would have to occur in those. But in one, the options 1 and 2, those, the goal of those is to provide that, if not all the space, a majority of the space in that first project to give you breathing room for your enrollments.
okay.
I think Tony had a
Good.
question.
Was there any other?
I think Tony Pergini had a question in the chat.
Oh,
I
sorry. Tony.
forgot, but I think the point was the designing the CIP projects. You know, I think it's in the schedule. So, you know, looking at my dog is excited about it. Huh? So, looking at phase 1, right on any one of them, there's a design phase, and some of those design phases go 12 months, 15 months, and you know, I don't know if we're going to be able to do a design for CIP projects or rental for every school in the plan, you know, by June. So I know that's feasible, but I want to go back to what Rich and others have said earlier. As we hit each phase of the plan, that design phase and the results of that, you know, might change that option. So I don't know if, yeah, I would love to have the CIP details tonight. I don't know if they're going to modernize the school. We haven't seen that list yet. I'm not sure if town council is going to be looking for that detail too, but if we look at what the data is telling us, yes, we definitely have an enrollment issue coming. We need space. We need a holistic plan too. So you know, again, there's a one on here that I'm 100 like completely against, but I think we keep in mind, we got to start someplace that solves not just immediate problem, but sets us up for a really good, inclusive, all-encompassing plan. That's how I'm looking at it. But this might change. We've seen it in South Windsor. I even saw it in Middletown when they built their 6th grade middle school a couple of years ago. So, you know, we'll address that bridge when we cross it, I guess is what I'm saying. But I like leaving the option of rental open or building new for the high school in these plans if possible, but that will change too. Thanks.
Gotcha. All right, thank you. All right. Jen, I think we'll turn it back to you. You're going to go through 2A and then the 3s and 4s.
Yep. So before we move on though, I just want to kind of summarize quickly where we are with this one. We are in favor of combining the two options, the Reno option versus the CIP option. It sounds like everyone is in agreement with keeping the Reno as part of most of them, but Chuck Warrington, you had already mentioned that you factored in a CIP version for Highland into your costs analysis.
Yes, because and we can add them back in if your committee wants to add them back in. It's just going to increase, you know, the total cost, and it seemed, again, kind of like what Rich was saying, you know, at first glance, Highland seems to be the one that CIP would kind of make sense for, you know, an initial value. And I think it deserves a deeper dive, but I think just walking through the school, it's in pretty good condition. And that one seems to make the most sense to recommend that for.
Okay. So at this high level, we have the option of option 1, we're going to call it, or 1A, I'm sorry, we're going to call it option 1A. It's going to be building the new K-6 elementary school, moving Darcy, moving Humiston to a lease space, and then closing Darcy, Chapman, and Humiston as part of phase 1. Are we all in agreement that that is the plan? And then as far as phase 2, phase 3, and phase 4, we will keep them as renovation for now, with a planned deeper dive if this is the option that we end up choosing after the financial analysis is done on phase 1. Anyone object to that? Okay. So that's what we'll do moving forward for 1A. The issues that we discussed, we have to look into the place for Humiston to be moved into as far as what the cost is. I know someone had brought up the fact that whether or not it's financially feasible to move them rather than keep them where they are. But I think the cost avoidance for the capital projects would offset that need. We are renovating with occupied buildings. And we need to make sure that we understand that this is really only, it is solving the elementary school capacity issue, but it really is only touching the Chapman North End district and doesn't really do anything for the other schools or anything else until later phases. So that's kind of a summary of where we are with that one. Everyone good? Okay, there are still some questions for this one, and we will absolutely go through them if this is the option we go through. We will discuss it again next week when we meet on the 27th, when Jim has the financial pieces put in place. We can then weigh the pros and cons as far as how much this is costing us versus what we're getting, and then make a decision at that point on this one. Okay, moving on. Before we go on to option 2A, which is the next one on the list, I want to talk briefly about the high school options. And what I mean by that is all of the options that we had on the list that started with either a renovation or a new high school. We've talked about them a few times. In the last meeting we had, we decided that we weren't going to pursue them, but I really wanted to just mention them one more time for everyone listening at home, as well as everyone here. All of those options that started with the high school were not feasible for our purposes. There's a number of reasons why. One is that it doesn't address the elementary enrollment issues. We are going to exceed the capacities at the elementary schools as quickly as next year. And that is something that we need to solve immediately. So starting with the high school doesn't fix that problem, and likely will not be approved by the state if that's the way we end up, or the way we had thought about going. If we were to recommend that as our option, it likely would not be approved by the state and we would not be able to move forward with it. In addition to that, the high school does not have capacity concerns at this time. Based on the enrollment projection data that we got from Malone and Broom, we are under capacity at the high school. I know that a lot of people seem to think that there is not enough room at the high school, and I'm sure there are some issues there as well. But as far as square footage versus number of people enrolled at that school, our numbers are actually quite the opposite. We do have some slides. Actually, if I'm technically savvy here, I might actually be able to share my screen quickly. Here we go. Can everyone see that? Yes?
There we
Okay,
go.
thank you.
Yep.
So quickly, just looking at this, you can see the projected elementary utilization. We are going to be hitting a lot of capacity issues over the next few years. You can see Darcy even next year. And as if you listen to the Board of Ed meetings recently, you'll know that we are going to not be able to fit all the Darcy kids that are coming in next year at Darcy. So we're going to have an issue really soon at all of these schools. As opposed to that, we have similar graphs here for Dodd and the high school. And as you can see, enrollment will be going down for the next few years, but then we'll creep back up as you see those elementary kids going through, Dodd and the high school, it will creep back up again. But at this point, we do not have an enrollment issue at the high school that we need to address. However, we do have enrollment issues that we absolutely have to address at the elementary school. So that's why we can't start with the high school. And on top of all that, we had 13 or so options, and 12 of the 13 SMC members that answered the matrix scorecard, all 12 people that responded scored that the lowest. So not only does it not fit the needs of the town, we are also all in agreement that is not where we should start. So that's where we are with the high school. Wanted to get it out there so that people could understand. I'll be with you in a second. Wanted to get out there for people to understand here, as well as, people watching at home. Matt, you had a question.
Yeah, I was going to do this in public comment, but, seeing as you brought the high school up, I think there's many positives that we're missing for the entire community. One of them being traffic, moving the traffic from the south and central section of town to the northern side of town is a positive for everyone that's ever stood in line between 7:30 and 8 o'clock and 2 and 4 o'clock. Economic development and increased tax base that comes with the building of a new high school in a new area. And also the potential for taking 3 schools offline because you are now going to have a brand new high school. You're going to have a high school that we're not touching for 7 years, according to our plans, maybe 5 to 7 years, I should say. The positives for the school system, you've got less maintenance if you have 3 less schools. You have less staff, you have less maintenance, you have less electricity, you have less heating costs. The full benefit of the closures would not be felt immediately, only on the transfer of the students from Dodge to the high school, which we could then potentially have a 6 through 8 scenario middle school, which I certainly fully agree with. In the high school, again, that I said that is not going to be touched for 5 to 7 years, and it was brought up by Ann Harrigan that Dodd really needs science labs and math labs and foreign language labs. They're all present and at the high school at this time. So it would certainly bring the 6 through 8 concept up to more modern standards than they have now. Then to balance the schools, you might have to consider the redistricting. It would also give us time to see if the increase in projections, and that's what they are, is projections. The increase in projections materialize. If they do materialize, you still have Dodd School as a school that is available for either swing space as we're renovating these schools, or as a potential temporary elementary school to take on the additional students again if they materialize. The negative is there's more traffic in the north end and the need to purchase property. I'm gonna stop at that point. I might make other comments in the comment section of our meeting. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So for moving on to option 2A, we want to review what the plan is for 2A. Chuck, Neth, would you mind sharing it since you have it up already, or do you still have it up?
I do.
Thank you. I don't have that one up quickly. So for option 2A, we are starting with the new 6 through 8 middle school. We are considering including the Board of Ed office space in that new middle school. That is something that Colliers has not actually factored into the cost. It is actually a new thing that we put in here to try to address some issues. So that is something that we would need to address. We're building a new K through 5 elementary school on the Chapman property. We would be moving Darcy pre-K to Highland, and the Darcy kindergarten would then go to Doolittle. The The Board of Ed offices would move to the new 6th through 8 middle school once it's built, and we'd be able to close Darcy. We'd like to then move Humiston to a leased space. There is also the possibility of moving Humiston to Dodd, but this is one area where we are dependent upon a future phase. So this would need to be walked through and talked about significantly and in detail to discuss whether or not that would be something we would want to do. And then we'd be able to close Humiston. In this scenario, in phase 1, you are now providing a new learning environment for 6th through 8th graders. You're getting a new kindergarten through K elementary school.
K through 5.
Thank you. Kindergarten through 5th grade elementary school. It's hitting a lot more kids, a lot more students than option 1A. And you're modernizing the schools in a more significant way. Moving on then phase 2, if phase 2 were to be approved, you would have Dodd available as swing space. Moving Doolittle kids into Dodd to renovate Doolittle. Then you move them back to Doolittle. Then you could move the Norton kids into Dodd to renovate Norton. And then moving on to phase 3, you'd still be able to do the same thing with Highland, moving them into Dodd. And then at that same time, this is where I was talking about how if we move Humiston into Dodd temporarily, you could have part of the building being taken up by the Humiston High School while you have the other schools kind of going in and out as their other schools, their home schools are being renovated. And then at the end of all these phases, when we're ready to close Dodd, we can then move the Humiston High School to their permanent final location. But what that buys you in the meantime is a space for those Humiston students to go that is already a school building, already within our Board of Ed budget, and eventually gives us time to find a permanent home for them, but does provide a better learning environment than Humiston building itself. So this addresses the elementary education enrollment projections in phase 1. We achieve modernization in multiple schools, not just one. We do provide that swing space, Dodd, to be able to achieve renovations of other schools while they're unoccupied, leading to faster construction times and cheaper construction as well. It eliminates, and again, that cost avoidance of CIP projects at Humiston as well as Chapman. Redistricting probably will not be needed since we will be building another another elementary school on the same property as Dodd. It would be a K through 5 school, so we'd have plenty of room in all of the schools because all those 6th graders would be moving into the new 6th through 8 middle school. So there'll be lots of room, and we probably will not need to redistrict the elementary kids. And the ability to close Darcy, Dodd, and Humiston is significant. The downside is the same as option 1. Those later phases, we really need to work through. Renovating the high school versus a new high school is still outstanding. If it is a renovation, it would be well occupied. And then that one question about Humiston, would we want to take the chance of moving them into Dodd temporarily if phase 2 is approved? Or would we just make the decision that as part of phase 1, we would move them directly into some new leased space rather than trying to move them into Dodd and then back out later? It's a lot of moving around, but it does buy us some time and is a little bit cheaper than moving them into a leased space right away. So something to think about. Chuck, if you could stop sharing at this point so I can see everybody. Anyone have any thoughts on this? Andrew, I saw your hand first.
What's the estimated cost of this one option? I mean, a brand new 6th through 8 middle school and a new elementary school at the same time?
Yes, that is the plan. We are trying to reach as many students as we can in phase 1 with a reasonable cost. I don't have I do have the numbers in front of me. 2A. So we have 2A Reno and 2A CIP, just like we had 1A Reno and 1A CIP. And it looks like the low and Chuck Warrington, correct me if I'm wrong on here. The low is 400 and, no, I'm sorry.
No, just phase one, John.
Phase one only.
Just
Yeah.
phase one.
Sorry, phase one. Chuck, would you be able to help me with this?
Sure, absolutely. So, so for total budget, I'll share the district share too. So I'm going to kind of estimate in the middle here, Andrew, between the high and the low. So we estimate the middle school to be roughly 125 million. I'm kind of cutting it down the middle, and then the new Chapman to be roughly 33 million.
And that's district share or total?
That's a total project budget. That'd be total project on that number. So 125, 33, 158, close to 160. If I'm adding my numbers up right. And then the district share, and I'm kind of hitting in the middle here, Andrew, roughly 82 million for the high school, or for the middle school would be the district share, and about 22 million for Chapman for the estimated district share.
Got it. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Rich, go ahead.
When we did the matrix, phase one only had the 6-8 middle school. And can you give me the reasoning for adding in the elementary at the same time?
Yeah, we, like I said, we are trying to get to as many students as possible, as early as possible. One of the things that we really want to make sure that we do is we are not making an earlier phase dependent on a later phase. If, as Chuck had mentioned earlier, if we have phase one and that gets approved, but then phase two goes to referendum and does not get approved, we want to make sure that we have done as much as we possibly can to further this project along. So the decision to add in that elementary school was something we thought was feasible to be able to hit more students and get a modernized facility faster for them.
I would just say, as an educator, I love it. I think it's a great plan. As a committee member, I'm nervous about selling a referendum that's going to be this expensive.
Understood. Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, and again, in the cash flows, we gave those to Jim, and I think once you get the cash flows back, it's going to be interesting between these three scenarios of, what's the, they'd say impacted average taxpayer. And I understand, there's concerns with other constituents in the town, but it's going to be interesting to see what those do once they come back. And it's the first round. And once you see it, you may say, hey, let's take it out of phase one, and how what's the possibility of whatever phase one passing a referendum. That's always like a crystal ball, to be honest.
Yeah, we have the costs of a lot of these things, but they're a very wide range at this point, and they don't factor in Jim Jascott's numbers into it. So that's really kind of a discussion for next week at this time, to really analyze these scenarios against the cost for them, not only just the total cost, but the impact to taxpayers. Our plan tonight was just kind of talk about the feasibility, the logistics, and figure out what we're comfortable recommending. So absolutely an important question, but I feel like we need Jim's information first before we can answer that. Don, go ahead.
Thank you. So why aren't we in scenario one, we're only building the elementary school. While in phase two, in scenario two, we're building 2 schools. And why aren't we thinking about putting the Board of Ed offices in the new elementary school in scenario one, if we're thinking about putting it in the middle school in scenario two? I'm just thinking, scenario one will probably come in a lot less than scenario two. I'm thinking, I don't know. But I just think that we have to think about those things as well. And my second question is, does the Board of Ed have to pass that they want to go to 6 through 8 middle school before we decide that we're going to build a 6 through 8? Because I mean, are we going to build it and they're going to come, or do they have to decide that's what they want to do and then we put that in? I wasn't sure. Maybe Tony can answer that.
Are you talking about the Board of Ed offices into the school?
He's talking about a 6 or 8 middle school arrangement.
6 through 8.
Just
Right.
like-
I mean, that's not up to us to decide whether we're going to do a 6 through 8. I think the Board of Ed has to decide whether they want to go to 6 to 8 first before we can say, well, because if we say we're going to build a 6 through 8 and they say, well, we're not going to 6 to 8, we don't want to build a school for 6 to 8. If they decide not to do that, I don't know. I mean, that's not,
Understood. So
that's
you're asking-
their
You're
decision. I
asking from a
assume.
program perspective where we're providing a solution based on an enrollment issue. So they are two different things.
Right. I get that, but how can we
I understand.
how can we say that we're going to want to build a 6 through 8 if so
I could chime
we
in
have
really
to know
quick
that
on
kind
that.
of.
Go ahead, Tony. Why don't you just
Oh,
shut
that's
up?
a good question. I think Chuck Morrington mentioned earlier tonight. So, so I'm pretty sure the Board of Ed is open to a 6 to 8. Again, we're looking at the whole plans, just like the group is tonight. In fact, I think most of them are watching live, so they know the details. So yes, the Board of Ed, well, first of all, superintendent would have to be okay with that. The Board of Ed would have to be okay with that. We would hold with education specs for something like that. We would have, I think, 3 readings and a vote. All that would have to happen by June, but certainly, whatever the final 2 options are of the committee, the board will move very quickly to at least let you know that those are viable options, and we will vote for them. But yes, Don, it's a good point. Jeff, and I want to speak for him, our superintendent's going to marry up the program into these options and relay that back to us. And so,
Yeah, I think, the one thing that we have that illustrates that this isn't a projection or a hypothesis is a lot of past experience in discussing this as a board. And on multiple occasions over the last several years, the board as a whole, and planning committee meetings as a whole, has really dove into this. Now, granted, there are a couple of new board members since that time, but each time they've fully supported a 6 through 8 middle school. So I don't think that it's something that I know that it's something that the board has been conscious of and is sensitive to and has historical support. Certainly we're discussing it here. There are members of the board here. It's important to be part of that, but there has been historical support for this.
the board, nobody on the board is vehemently against a new middle school or some of these options. We all have our preferences. So I gauge the board almost every week on these options. Now, again, like everyone else, we're going through the details, they're looking, they're following along, and hoping that we look at the whole picture and the most encompassing solution we can come up with. If I felt that right now there was consensus on the board, this was not an option, you'd know about it. So, now, again, hopefully it doesn't change.
Okay,
But
well,
if
I
it
just
does,
want to
we'll
make
be the
sure that
first to
because
know.
well, yeah, no, I figure, but I mean, I you don't want to put the cart before the horse, so I just
No,
want
I
to make
agree.
sure that
Thank you, Don. That's
the way we do
I,
it.
I get it. Yeah, and again, I expect as soon as these
But
options.
going back to my first thing about,
Sorry.
go ahead, sorry. Go back to my first question about why aren't we putting the Board of Ed offices in the scenario 1? Have we looked into that as well rather than lease space?
I don't know if we've looked into that. I don't think we have. That is certainly something we could look into. And that's exactly why we're meeting and talking about all these options right now.
Yeah, I think you could if you wanted to.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Okay, Tony, I saw you put something in the chat that you had a question.
Sorry, Jen. Yeah, I too noticed. I think Rich pointed out that we're doing multiple school projects in the first phase of phase 2.
Mhm.
So we would, in this phase, we build a new middle school, and also in parallel or some sequence in that phase, build a new K-5 Chapman. Where are we going to demolish Chapman and build a K-5 on the site? I thought there was enough space.
Yes.
Oh, that is the case. So there's
That
space
is, we're
enough
doing
for
it
that.
yes, on Chapman's property, and then we'll demo the old one.
Okay, so I don't have to worry about swing space for that particular school.
Right.
Got it. Great, thanks. That was it.
Right, and this option does provide swing space for the other schools as well. Yep. I know I saw another hand. Oh, Kate, go ahead.
I had a couple things. Although 1 and 2 both have elementary enrollment addressed in phase one, I think it's important to note that the first 1A does it in school year 24-25, and 2A does it the following school year. So while they're both in phase one, they are 8 months apart from each other when we're planning on having that resolved. And by 24-25, we're going to have 3 schools that are over capacity. So, I think it's a pro for 1A or maybe a con for 2A that it's going to take an additional school year to resolve that enrollment issue. And I didn't see that anywhere in the chart, and I just think it should be noted.
Yeah, that's a good point. Mhm.
Second thing, as a parent from Norton School in the past, Norton's a very community school. My kids walked, most of their friends walked, tons of walkers, Doolittle's the same way. If I knew my child had to go to Dodd across town, the only time they ever take a bus was when they went to Dodd for an entire year or maybe more if construction doesn't go well. That could be a real issue for some of our parents. And I think that even though we're only talking about phase one, and that doesn't happen till phase two, I think we really need to be clear with parents and the community that this is going to be a huge issue for people. Kids with anxiety issues, kids with special needs. There's a lot of kids who are going to have struggle being in a different school for an entire year when they move. And I just think we need to be upfront with the public that if we move forward with this plan, that this is a potential for their children. The third thing is the cost. I know we talked about doing a lot of upfront costs in the first phase, and I don't know what the ballpark cost is for phase one. We haven't gotten that information yet, but right now with COVID and so many people unemployed and so many people struggling, so many more people having to use social services and food pantries, I'm not sure that this is the best time for us to front load all of these costs in phase one. So when I look at, 1A and 2A, just thinking of where we are right now financially, 1A just seems like so much of a better option for the people in this town because it'll have so much of a less financial impact.
Do you still feel that way, given the fact that 1A really doesn't address all the districts?
What do you mean all the districts?
Like, for instance, if we were just to do, in scenario 1A, where we're just building a new K through 6 elementary school, and we're not touching Doolittle, Norton, Dodd, Highland, anything until later phases, it really only impacts certain elementary districts, Chapman mostly. Do you still feel that way, that it's a better option financially, even given the fact that we're only touching maybe not even a quarter of the students in the whole town?
I think because I would like to take it slower in phase one, it does solve the Darcy issue, which is the most impending issue. The next impending issue is going to be Highland. Norton and Doolittle are like 6 years, 10 years, like they're way down the road. So yeah, I'm okay with doing them later because they don't have the same imminent enrollment issues like some of the other schools do. They're not all equal when it comes to that.
Okay, thanks for your feedback.
I thought we were just saying that Darcy was at capacity now.
It is, I believe, I think starting next year, some of the classes will actually need to move to Doolittle. I don't want to put Jeff on the spot since he's not really visually or auditorially, is it a word, here? He's back.
He's back.
Auditorily and visually present.
I didn't know if you were dealing with an issue or something. I didn't want to.
I have a struggle being intellectually present most of the time, but I am focused on what we're doing here tonight. So, yeah, next year our enrollment is such at Darcy that we have 2 classes that I have to move to Doolittle. And so already the enrollment is starting to impact what we're doing in our elementary schools. And I have a lot of things that keep me up at night these days, but one of them is the vision of lumping portables onto our elementary properties to accommodate this. And I just my 2 cents, I think it would be wonderful and a perfect world, maybe if conditions were a little bit different, to include both a Chapman and middle school build. I worry about that size of a project in that first start, undermining confidence in being able to fiscally manage it. But I think it's optimal from the perspective of, just solving our problems. But in the context of the finance, I worry about it a little bit. That's just my 2 cents. I really think that, the 6 through 8, if we can pull kids out, it's a huge step in alleviating the issue. And I think, like they said in South Windsor, when people see that this is possible, when they see the, impact or ultimate lack of massive impact on taxes and the benefit that the town derives, it's easier once you've built that momentum. Just, again, my 2 cents.
Okay, thank you.
And I would just also piggyback on Kate was mentioning that, Norton and Doolittle are these community kind of neighborhood schools. Chapman's the same way, as we all know. So if we decide to build a new Chapman someplace else, that's going to have an impact on that community as well as if we had to do some kind of major redistricting. So we just need to keep that in mind.
Okay, thank you. There are issues at Chapman that need to be addressed as far as ADA compliance, and we've all been there. We've seen the schools. I think that was one of the reasons why we tried to include it in phase 1 of the 2A scenario. Obviously, if this group is more comfortable putting that off to phase 2, that's something we can discuss. But I believe the significant issues with the facility kind of necessitated the desire to have it done earlier or sooner rather than later. Matt, go ahead.
I take it that if we're going to redo Chapman, and you had said earlier, Chuck Warrington, that the Chapman site as it is today is not large enough for an elementary school. Is that correct? And the cost of $33 million, does that include property?
So just to clarify,
These are the top results.
oops, sorry. When we look preliminarily at replacing Chapman with in the 2A option, the enrollment for that school is not 700 kids. We can't fit a 700 student. When we were talking about that before, it was for the 1A. And how much does a 700, 100,000 square foot school property need? That site, based upon a very, looking at the size and our experience, wouldn't, my opinion, wouldn't support that school. But support building a school, a replacement, and I'm just looking at the square footage here. Let's see, bear with me. So your existing school is just shy of 54,000 square feet. So that's half of what we're proposing for new elementary school. Replacing that with something comparable on that site, looking at it, we'd want to study a little bit more, but we think it can support building a new school north of it in the field. It'd be occupied construction. It would be tight. I'm not saying it wouldn't be tight. And then you move the operation to the new school, let the contractor take over the old one, abate it, demolish it, and then you'd have to reestablish parking lots and so forth for the existing.
But Chuck, so then you're talking about not doing the $33 million. How many students were you thinking of putting into that $33 million renovation?
So for the new Chapman, that would be 33. That's 381 students based upon the projected enrollments.
Well, 33 million, how many students would that school hold?
I just said 381.
381. And what is it, what is this, what's the enrollment now at Chapman?
Based upon the latest that I had, I don't have the 2020s, but at Chapman, 2019 was 388, and what Malone McBroom had projected for 2020 was 408. I don't know if
No,
Ben or
that's
Jeff have
okay.
that number.
What that answers my question is we're going to build a new school for $33 million, smaller in capacity than the school that we currently have there now, on a site that is directly across from a prison for which the Board of Ed was chastised for many years ago. And the people that had just moved in didn't realize that the prison was there prior to Chapman School. So now we're taking upon ourselves to build a school across from a prison. And a smaller school at that, at $33 million. That to me makes absolutely, positively no sense whatsoever. Thank you.
Well, the alternative to that is if you go to renovate Chapman, it's the comparable cost is going to be about $28 million. So you're going to spend 33 million or 28 million, totally up to you, but you're going to have a better programmatically laid out building that's brand new than dealing with the existing condition. And that's up to you to value. Go, is it worth a couple extra $1 million to build a brand new school that's designed exactly the way you want it, meets all the programmatic needs, versus dealing with a shell in the structure you have now? That's a very subjective discussion of what the value is.
I have no problem with spending a few $1 million more in any way, shape, or form. I do have a problem not addressing our image issues that they say are coming down the road, and to build the same size or smaller school for $33 million.
Okay, so the reason the school is smaller is because we're removing grade 6 from the school in this plan. So the 6th graders are going to go into a 6th through 8 middle school, which means you'll have a lower enrollment at that school. And that's why you can build a school right-sized for the number of students that are coming in through K through 5.
Makes no sense. Thank you.
Chuck, you had something?
Yes, I got a couple things on 2A reno. So right now in phase 1, it says to move Humiston High School to a lease space or DOD if phase 2 was approved. And I would think at the end of phase 1, you wouldn't move it until you knew whether it was approved or lease space, right? So that would just stay there until we had phase 2 decision, correct? Is that the plan?
Say that again.
So the alt high school right now, it
Right.
says in phase 1, move it to a lease space or DOD if
Right.
phase 2 is approved. You ultimately wouldn't make that decision until we
Until
knew
later,
whether phase
right.
2 was approved or not. So that'd be at the end of phase 1 is what I'm getting at. 1.
Right, and we wouldn't be able to move them into DOD until DOD was emptied anyway. So
Yep.
that's a decision that would be happening later. And we can discuss, where we want to go with that and what types of moves we want them to make, and spaces we want to use. Yep.
Got it. My second comment on the scenario in general, unlike scenario 1A where I think you can move around phases 2 through 4, it really wouldn't work to move around the subsequent phases in this one because you'd be left with an empty DOD for phase, until you go through the renovations of the other elementary schools because you're using it as swing space.
Right. So we wouldn't be able to do the high school and leave DOD empty and then later on do the elementary schools and use DOD for the swing space. That would be
Correct.
right.
And then my third comment on the scenario is similar, not necessarily being married to what's here. And I guess some might not like this if we didn't like the cost of a Chapman school is looking even further at building a bigger elementary school, K through 5, in phase 1 with this, that would replace Norton and allow you to close Norton and Chapman together. So you'd end up with 3 elementary school districts. You'd have a southern district, which would be the new Norton, Doolittle, and Highland. Is that a possibility to look at and evaluate?
Who are you asking?
Chuck, Jen,
yeah.
anybody? Does anybody
I
have any
mean,
thoughts on
do you think
that?
it's really an option to evaluate? Chuck, what are your thoughts on that?
Hey, can you repeat that again, Chuck? I'm sorry.
So right now we're saying build a new 6 through 8 middle school and then a
Yep.
K through 5 elementary school on the Chapman
Sure.
site.
Yep.
I'm going one step further and saying build a new K through 5 elementary school that's large enough that we could get down to 3 elementary schools that are K through 5 and would take Norton offline in addition to Chapman. So you'd end up with a new quote unquote Norton in the south end, Highland and Doolittle, 3 K through 5 elementary schools.
You mean like replacing Norton with a larger one, potentially in that back lot or something along those lines? Or,
Either in that back lot or somewhere in the
Sure.
south end of town to make the districting work.
Yeah, you can certainly do that as a spinoff from this, you know, if you wanted to. We could evaluate it, certainly subject to, you know, having a site to support it. Whether it's a new site or, you know, I think we've looked at the Norton parcel before where the, you know, the school's up front, there's a big field in the back. That's another case where, you know, if that wanted to be explored, I'd certainly want to bring on a design team to take a deeper dive on that to study it more. It's a possibility for sure.
And just to recap, that means we'd have a new 6 through 8 middle school somewhere in town. And Chuck, you're saying no new Chapman, but redistricting Highland, Norton, and Doolittle with a new replaced larger Doolittle.
You replace larger Norton. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, Norton. So I know we asked Milona McBroom to evaluate those numbers and figure out if we could eliminate any elementary school, but not in context with being able to build a big enough new Norton. So that
As is,
Correct. Yeah. When we had asked them, it was relative to the 3 that were left before, and then
Right.
merging the Chapman students there. This would be building a school that would be big enough to house that
It
extra.
would require a lot of redistricting.
It would require one redistricting scenario. Right?
Nothing with all the Chapman kids south, probably to Highland. Highland kids, you know, and you're picking up Norton and kids that are in Highland now into the new school.
You'd redistrict
we're
once,
looking
though,
at
is what I'm getting at, right?
Yeah, you'd be redistricting a lot of kids in town
Once.
once, yeah. Just having done redistricting, it becomes a hot potato, so you got to be just very careful of it.
A while ago, Tony put a question in the chat box there, so we'll go to Tony next.
Yeah, it's short. I do like this option. I am concerned that we're putting a lot in phase 1, and when we graded these, we had these broken out in separate phases. I will tell you, I probably would have graded a little differently, knowing that they're all lumped into phase 1 back then, because just the impact that Jeff mentioned to the school district, which could all be manageable, I guess, but we never talked about that. Did the options committee meet and talk about trying to reach as many school kids as possible? Is that what changes? I
don't remember.
Or was it driven from the timeline of schedules?
Yeah.
Know this about.
It was something that came up in a few meetings. I don't remember exactly which one was first, but trying to reach as many students as possible, as quickly as possible, was something that was in one of those, in the columns of one of those matrix questions. Is the, I don't remember what the name of it was. I think I have it here. But yeah, I mean, student impact, the timeliness of the benefits. So I think it started with that conversation. And I'm not sure exactly of when it happened, that all the meetings kind of blur together at this point, but it did come up later for sure.
Yeah, it wasn't
if something that would, yeah, if it's something that changes your scoring, we can definitely take that into consideration.
No, I'm not saying going back and rescore. I love, I mean, this is one of my one of the top three phases. I would just say that if it was phase one, use 6th to 8 middle school, and you did that, and that's all the town was able to do for a few years, it does solve your enrollment problem. It frees up space of money to schools. And being that it's just one project, even though it would be a very large project in itself, it would demonstrate to the town that we're capable as a town to pull off these projects. We haven't had, other than the treatment plant in recent history, this large of a project. So I am a little concerned about doing everything in phase one. I'm also concerned about how parents will take that. But I think with the proper messaging and mitigation strategies, we could probably work through that. But nonetheless, we'll bring this up to the board tomorrow night so they can see these options. And if we discuss it and if there's any concerns, we'll definitely share with you. But that was it.
So we can definitely leave it as it is now, or we can decide to change it. I mean, that's something that we're doing tonight, is making decisions on these things. So if it's something that everyone feels, I mean, we don't have the financial numbers though either. So maybe we want to wait till next week when we see the finances and then decide on that. That's something we can table and put off until then.
I actually was about to mention that. I think isn't part of this also there might be a benefit to the finances by doing this sooner, efficiency. So I would love to see that, what that looks like. I don't know if the fans will change or was broken out, but I would definitely like to see that input.
Okay.
Personally. Thank you.
Matt, go ahead.
Jeff Solon, you say there's 325 students currently at Chapman. How many students are currently at Norton?
Give me a second to grab that. I'll give you the exact number.
And while he's looking it up, Chuck
409.
Warrington.
409.
I'm sorry, Jeff?
409.
409. And what is the projection of in 2026 for both of those schools? So at this point, one 700 students school could almost do it, but it's not taking into consideration any of the projections for the future.
But Matt, 6th grade will be out.
Yeah, but I'm looking for the projections. I know
What
6th grade will be out.
what
6th grade will be
scenario
out.
are you
Many of the
talking about
scenarios
now?
that we're doing. Chuck, the question I had for you is Norton is an L-shaped piece of property, correct?
Correct. That is correct.
So if you move that school, if you build a new school in back of the current Norton school,
Mm-hmm.
you have property to the east that is now just woods that could be used for, playgrounds, etc.
Correct.
I like Chuck Neff is, thinking along the lines that we should be thinking how to consolidate, how to save money. But it does present a problem, like Rich said, with redistricting. And it, no matter what we do in the next 6 weeks, it's going to be a hot potato. So sooner or later, we're going to have to get to redistricting, and sooner or later, somebody is going to be displaced. Actually, many kids are going to be displaced. But I think the Norton school site is something that should be considered.
Okay. Does anyone else have any points, questions, comments? Andrew, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to, after Chuck brought that up, when I first originally got involved in this, my initial thought was expansions and renovations to Highland, expansions and renovations to Doolittle, and building a new South End Elementary School and going from current 4 to 3 larger elementary schools. I didn't realize there was as much property at Norton as there is. And along the lines of what Matt was just saying, by building the 2 schools, you're going to be around that 700 number. But if we build the middle school, then 6th grade is going to be pulled out of our current enrollments of those schools. And so you will have the room to grow in the elementary school and still have a 700 student school.
Chuck Warrington, could you talk a little bit about being able to build a new Norton on the Norton property?
Yeah, if I could maybe share, I got that property map up here. So this is, again, an aerial. We underlaid, the tax assessor's maps, the white lines, the outer one's your property line, and the inner one is our understanding of the setbacks subject to verification here. I'll try to zoom in, but I think most of you are familiar with the entry to Norton off the street, and it over to the left, and it's really kind of in this front, the front portion of the property that's very narrow. Just looking by massing, by observation, there appears in the topography in this area is relatively consistent. It doesn't seem to be a lot of change in grade, which is a plus. And is kind of Matt Bauman said, this whole eastern portion back here is wooded. And this is one I would recommend further study if you wanted to pursue it, to really, get, a design team, do a rough layout, with the assumed square footage. This would probably become parking up in here. Playgrounds in the back that are protected and they're surrounded by your, residential districts and housing. I think there's some potential here that might be worthwhile looking at. In this scenario, though, I would certainly recommend move them out completely, because this through here, the only access is from the street, and getting back there from a contractor would be a challenge, I'll say. And not say it can't be done, it'd be tight. But if you were able to, move them to, say, dot in a swing space, that would accelerate construction. It'd make it a lot easier, save some general conditions. But yeah, that's what kind of what we were seeing in here. Any questions on that, Aaron? I think.
Sorry.
Yeah, it sounds like, Jen and everyone, that we're talking about putting that whole idea of the new elementary school into phase 2, taking it out of the phase 1.
Well, that is definitely something.
Because then we have time to explore both of those ideas, and it also takes the cost out of the phase 1. And as Superintendent Solon mentioned, it gives us the opportunity to get a project to fruition and get the community to see what it's like to have a new school, what it does for the town, what it does for students' attitudes. And I think it brings a lot of joy to a town to have a new school. And I feel like having all of that in phase 1 is just a lot. It's a lot to manage the costs. It's a lot to manage the communication, and it's a lot to manage getting everyone on board, getting the entire community on board with the magnitude of that. And it takes away from us the time, and the community, the time to think about what we really want to do with that elementary school option.
Okay. So where we are right now is that the Colliers has provided cash flows to Jim to do his analysis on these scenarios to be presented next week. I'm not sure if we were to start changing things and removing schools, if that would change what he needs to do, and if that would impact, his work at all. So the question is, do we let him continue with the cash flows that he already is working on, see what that impact is next Wednesday night, and make a decision at that point? Or are we all in agreement at this point that we want to cut out the elementary school piece from phase 1 of scenario 2A now, and then have to go back and redo those cash flows and resend them to Jim and have him analyze them for the next meeting? Done.
I just had a quick question. If we just go with the middle school in this one, does that fix the issues with the enrollment in all the elementary schools. Because if we're looking at it as a phase one standalone project, I know moving it to 6 through 8, how does that affect the enrollment projections going forward, or will we still be above in most of our schools?
No, it's my understanding that it does fix all of the enrollment issues at all of the elementary schools. Chuck or John, you can correct me if I'm wrong.
For the next 5 years?
I believe we projected out 8 years, right?
Yeah, we went out 8 years, and it gets us very close where we need to be, Don. I think, like, because if we're going to move, the one thing that we have to have, I don't want to have Malone take a closer look at is just confirming moving the pre-K to Highland in there. And what those numbers, because I think the pre-K is, if I remember, right about 105 students. Ben or Jeff, in these, we have Darcy pre-K projected at 105, and the 6th grades at Highland are projected higher than that. So just want to confirm that, Don, but I think overall, I want to say yes, but want to just confirm them.
Pretty darn good, Chuck. We're actually up to 106.
All right.
Wait till tomorrow, probably 107.
There you go. But yeah, I mean, I'm looking at the projections for grade 6 at Highland going out, and those vary between 100, 5, 6 years, 128 to 150 range. So there is some, and I think it's looking at programming too. I think if we look at the use of the building, combine those, we might be able to get creative there. Moving grade 6 greatly helps. Let's put it that way.
Okay. Yeah, I just want to make sure that.
Okay, Rich, is that your hand up?
Yeah, I would just say that I would definitely move the elementary out of phase 1. I just recall 3 years ago when the proposal was put out for a new middle school and the reaction of some people in town at that time on the cost of 6-8 middle school. And I think if we come in with that plus an elementary school, it's going to be a very, very hard sell.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I would support moving the.
I saw Kate's hand first. Go ahead, Kate.
Okay, sure.
When I was looking at the projected elementary utilization page, actually, the middle school would be completed for school year 25-26, correct? According to the timeline. And according to our numbers from my loan, every school except Doolittle is going to be over capacity before that. So Highland's going to be over capacity. Norton, like they're all over that target capacity except for Doolittle. So what are we going to do while we're waiting for Dodd to be built and then to move the 6th grades in and then redistrict? Like what are we going to do with these kids?
It wouldn't be the first time that we have to make that decision, Kate. When I was principal at Dodd Middle School, we had 900 kids. It's way over capacity. You have to pull people out of rooms, put them on carts. Some of the specials. It's certainly. I mean, I think that question that you just asked, that oh my gosh, what do we do, is the reason that we need to do something now, because what you're going to see is this scenario play out across our district if we fail to take action. That's teachers on carts all over the place. Alternatively, you have the portables. I mean, nobody wants their child's art teacher coming in on a cart. Not in our community. I think we expect something a little different than that. And yeah, we may have to deal with that in this scenario for a brief period, but I think it's easier to deal with that for that brief period when you see light at the end of the tunnel. And I think part of that is completion of phase 1, 6th through 8 school alleviates a fair amount of pressure there. Ultimately, then you look to phase two. But that question you just asked is at the heart of why we're having this conversation and why it's so important.
Jim, go ahead.
Thanks. I was just going to say that I agree with Rich and Ann and Tony and everyone else. I think that I feel that the moving that in this phase one, moving the K-5 elementary, out of this phase would be the right thing to do.
Okay, thank you. Chuck, was that your hand?
Yeah, I would say that I don't agree. I think we wait and see what the financial stuff comes back and says, and I think we should keep it in phase one. But what Kate was saying is, we're not moving into 25, 26. That's really the case with any of the scenarios unless you're moving in mid-year. So like in the 1A where you're building a new elementary school, that's counting on moving in mid-year of the 25, right?
For 1A?
Yeah, I think the 1A scenario of like the elementary school, it shows like a December move
Yes.
of the students. So you're really not picking up anything additional, I guess. You're picking up 6 months there is all you're doing.
Yeah, Chuck, in our schedule, I'm looking at our 1A schedule that we developed for the cash flow. We're showing, although, the construction of the new elementary school being completed late winter, maybe early spring, but not occupying until the fall of 2025 for the elementary school. In our scenario there, and then looking at the 2A, the middle school would be occupied in fall of 2025 as well.
Yeah, I guess that's what I was saying is regardless of what we do, you're not getting into these schools in 2025, and that's not anything to do with this. It's because we started this in 2020 and not 2010.
And with these schedules, there's no way I don't see us being able to compress a year in the process.
Okay. So we need to make a decision. Do we keep it as it is for now, let Jim do his analysis and revisit it again next week and then discuss it again? Or do we change everything now, adjust the cash flows and resend everything to Jim again to do analysis on a smaller phase one to look at for next week?
I would not send it back to him to change it. He's already got enough on his plate. I would just let him do what he has right now and see where it comes out to.
I see Tony's note. Matt, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't think at this point I would change it only because it's here and he's already started his work on it. I certainly do have a concern, again, with the cost of your middle school, not having property in it and not knowing where it's going. But I think this phase, I think we should definitely keep both the middle school and the elementary school intact for now. We can always take them out once we know the numbers.
Okay, and note from Andrew, we can always break the cost out of the elementary school of the option once I can't see the rest of it, once we have the projection. Okay, so let's continue on the track we're on. Oh, sorry, Sylvia, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to agree with that. Let's keep that process going the way it is. That gives us some numbers. Right now, we're speculating on numbers completely. So let's have some numbers for all of these pieces. It's a lot we've learned tonight, but let's let him continue his process and then go from there.
Okay, so we will let it go. Scenario 2A is going to be reviewed on a financial basis based on what we've already submitted to him. We have everyone's comments and concerns on here. We're going to move on now to the next option, which is 2B. And Chuck is going to lead the discussion on that one.
Yeah, let me just pull it up here. Hang on. All right, so similar here. In phase one would be build a new 7th through 8 middle school. This would include the Board of Ed office space. Also build new K through 4 elementary school. Again, this would be on the Chapman site. demo the old Chapman. In phase one, we'd move all the 7 to 8 students to the new 7 to 8 middle school, move the Board of Ed offices to the new 7 to 8 middle school, move all the 5 to 6 students to Dodd, move Darcy pre-K to Highland, move Darcy kindergarten to Doolittle, and then move the alternate high school to a leased space and end with closing Darcy and Humiston. So we talked about phase 2, 3, and 4 would have the option to be moved around in this scenario. Right now, phase 2 would be renovate Doolittle and Norton. Phase 3, renovate Dodd and Highland. And phase 4 would be renovate the high school. So I think a lot of the comments, excuse me, would be similar to the previous option as far as keeping the K through 4 elementary school in this one. And then also, having some flexibility with the other phases. Is there any additional comment here for as is? Do we want to keep this as a scenario for now? Anybody have any thoughts? Hang on. Anybody? Yeah, go ahead, Ann.
Just my personal
Jeff.
opinion or my educated opinion. I just don't like the programming of having Dodd turned into a 5-6 and pulling the 5, is it 5-6?
It would be 5, 6, yes.
And pulling the 5-6 there. But it does not appeal to me, and it seems like a lot of moving students. And it also, what that does programmatically is it incorporates another, which can be done. Anybody can argue with me on this one. But it is another transition when the kids go to one school for K through 4, another school 5, 6, another school 7, 8, and then another transition to go to the high school. But I don't think that's ideal. Can be done effectively.
Got it. Thanks, Ann. Go ahead, Jeff. Sorry.
Yeah, real quick. From when we first did the tours, the feedback I got was curriculum in our district was aligned with 6th through 8th graders. So keeping those kids together made a whole lot of sense, and the feedback that we've gotten from the middle school has echoed that. And if I'm not mistaken, this creates an extra building for us, where it seems like it would be much more cost effective to have less buildings in town, more buildings in town. And that's it.
Thank you. And Sylvia, I saw your note in there, too many options, too many transitions for kids and overall programming. I guess from the continuing the Board of Ed stance on this, Tony, is there a strong opinion one way or another on the programming for this? Or
The consensus, there wasn't really any consensus and support for it. I think the board had more questions. We never really discussed the last board 5 through 6 options or just new 7 through 8. I think one of the notes in the spreadsheet is a little more research is required for the K through 4. I think we have a lot more questions than answers, and I know one of the big concerns was it's a lot of shuffling of kids, potentially splitting up siblings across schools, et cetera. But to be honest with you, I don't have any concrete details, or I also have a few board members, certainly Dr. Solon does, on what the benefits of programming just 5 through 6 would do for us. And so we need a little more details on that. So I'm open to it, but for me, it wasn't in the top 3, but for the board, it was more questions than support.
Got it. Thank you. And I know from a couple emails I had seen, there was a question of whether this was kind of overbuilding on the K through 4, and that's kind of where that more research analysis required to determine, what the right size of that new K through 4 building would be. So that's what that's addressing. Is anybody strongly in favor of keeping this in consideration if we are trying to pare this down for consideration over the next couple weeks. Go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, I would have no problem with with it being removed. There is way too many moving parts.
Got it. Answer your question, Jeff. Yeah, we can motion to remove. I don't know that we need a motion necessarily, but we can entertain that.
If we need it for official cause, I will motion to remove that option.
Is there a second to remove it as an option?
I would second.
There you
Second.
go. I saw Ann pop up there.
Look at that efficiency.
All in favor of removing 2B as an option for consideration?
Aye.
Any opposed? So let it be written.
There's a victory.
Progress. Decision's been made. That's awesome.
Look at that.
Hey,
Nice
on our
work.
way.
Let's see if we
hours
can
not
keep the
happening.
momentum
Good job,
going
guys.
here.
Jim will be happy. That's less work for him.
Yeah, we're gonna try and keep the momentum going here with
Hurry
the
up and
scenario
email
number
Jim so he
5.
stops.
I'm
Hey,
ready.
let Jim know now.
Keep it going.
It's only 9:19.
So scenario number 5, Jen, did you want to touch on this, or I can kind of touch on this?
We can talk about this. This option was to renovate all the schools. The order of the schools was never really written or addressed. But getting back to someone else's question earlier, just because we renovate a school doesn't necessarily mean we're renovating it to fit the number of children that need to be fit into that school. So you'll see the note there that the scenario must be either rewritten or revised to include construction of an addition at one or more of the elementary schools, or it needs to be removed from consideration. There is no way to fit all of the children that are coming in into renovated status for all of those schools. So Chuck Warrington, excuse me, Chuck Warrington, could you just touch briefly on whether or not, if we do renovations on all the schools, if we were to put additions on all the schools, do you feel that there's any way that we could accommodate the number of students that are coming in?
I think there'd be challenges with certain of the options at the elementary school level. Obviously, that's, I think, what we're talking about. Highland, although that property appears to be large, when you really look at it in the setbacks and the wetlands in the police station, there's not as much opportunity. Not to say it can't be done. You know, there, Doolittle, certainly Norton, I think we looked at that. Those would have to be studied further, really, in detail to go.
So, sorry.
So those would be alterations, additions, / renovations, and in order to receive that renovation status, everybody remembers back when we were talking about the requirements of that. You have to be able to show you meet the space standard. The state's going to say if you're going to renovate it and it's too small, you know, they're not going to support it. They're going to say you're going to run out of room. They don't want to put that good money after bad. So, you know, you definitely would need some additions, and I think that would warrant some close study on those existing sites.
Okay. So we can discuss this. There would need to be additions put on the schools. There would need to be renovations done while occupied. It would be a challenge. If anyone has comments, we can certainly discuss it, or we can do what we just did with option 2B and just decide whether or not we want to remove this. Is this something that everyone is comfortable removing from the list of options and scenarios?
Yes.
I heard a yes from Jim.
So moved.
Wait a minute, could I have, Jen, who's making a motion, and is it to remove number 5?
The question on the table right now is, are we comfortable removing number 5 because we
Right, but I heard a motion. I heard somebody.
yeah.
Checking that.
So Chuck, Sylvia, do you have a question or comment before
No,
we?
I would second it. That was
Okay.
unless somebody else did, right?
Jen, I have a question.
Okay.
We're chatting on this meeting about certain comments. Are those comments being made public?
I'm sorry.
We're chatting amongst ourselves during this Zoom meeting. Are those comments public?
Yes.
This video, this.
No, well, that, you know, some of these comments should be, they're opinions of people, and they should be made public. Just to, you know.
They're going to be documented in the minutes, and this is being broadcast on YouTube right now.
But that's why I asked, can they see what we're chatting amongst ourselves with?
You're talking about the chat comments?
Yes.
Oh.
Yeah.
I don't know the answer to that. That would be a technical question. I don't know if people watching from YouTube can see the chat.
Arnett, could you answer that, please?
Mike?
I don't believe they can, but from what I've heard, and I think it can continue, the comments have actually been read out loud by somebody in the group. As long as someone reads them out loud, then we've met FOI.
Thank you.
Okay, so Chuck has moved to remove option 5 from our list of scenarios. I believe a lot of people seconded it, but we'll go with Sylvia since she said it out loud. Everyone in favor of removing option 5 from our list? Anyone against? Okay, option 5 is now removed from our list. Okay, with that, we are left with option 1A, which we combined into one. Similarly with option 2A, and we didn't really talk about 2B, but it's the same thing where it's either CIP versus renovation. So we're going to be left now with two options, 1A and 2A, and they will be reviewed as far as, future phases and what there's going to be doing to them, etc. But we'll make sure that Jim is focused on those two for our meeting next week, and we'll do a deeper dive into both of those at that point. We made it. Congratulations, everybody.
Take a breath.
That is not the agenda, though. Don't go anywhere. I lost my, there it is. Nope, that's not it. I lost my agenda. The next item, I believe, was Rich. Oh, there it is. Yes, Rich, communication update, communication subcommittee.
I want to focus a little bit on the survey. As you'll recall, the full committee approved doing a survey and really had two purposes. One was to gather data to help us make a final decision as we're going to the council and the Board of Ed. And the other was to give us suggestions and ideas of how we could best bring this project to referendum and get it passed. I opened up the development of the survey to everyone. Ann Harrigan joined our committee. We've been working on the survey over the last few weeks, and have a third draft right now of it, working with the Center for Research and Public Policy. We have some questions. Jim Jascott has been great. I had sent him some information. I wanted to know what the average house prices were. I wanted to know how that would impact mill rate and tax rate, depending on the size of different projects, and using the average costs that Colliers had given us for various projects, we were able to go through and do some calculations. So we have basically the whole survey done, other than clarifying some of the issues regarding what the phase one projects are. Originally, we were looking at the total costs. We, as a committee, decided to focus just on the phase one costs. We don't want to go out to the town with a whole project, particularly when a lot of the issues are still unclear at this point. So we have a meeting tomorrow night. We were hoping to be able to get this put together in our meeting tomorrow, which would have it going online between January 26th and February 12th, with the report due back to us on March 1st. The one hangup that we have right now is, since we have one of our scenarios now unclear, which would be the middle school plus the elementary school, that issue is still out there. And then, of course, our calculations are based on the general information Jim Jascott has given us, but not the final information that Jim Jascott has given us. So when I talked to Jen initially, the feeling was, let's try to get the information in by March 1st if we can, which would help the Board of Ed and Town Council as they're making some final decisions. But we may now have to delay. So that's where we're at. Jen?
Sorry, Richard, can I just ask a quick question about that? I'm actually really curious as to how the public would view our option 2A with the elementary school included versus just the middle school. Is there a way to include both of those scenarios as two separate things in the survey just to get an idea of the public opinion?
Yeah, that could actually easily be done because what you're doing is going in and saying, here's based on the average house price in town and based on a 20-year bond at 4%, which is what Jim Jascott gave us, a new elementary school that would cost the town, and we're using the average price estimated district share that Colliers had given us, would cost X amount, which would relate to X amount per month to you as a taxpayer. And it could be done that you do it for the elementary school, the 700 student elementary school, the 6-8 middle school, and then you could do a third one that says, if we do a smaller elementary school and a middle school, here's what that dollar figure would look like.
Mhm. Okay.
So yeah, we could do that, and that would allow us to go out very soon. Matt?
Is this something we're going to discuss at the January 27th meeting as a group and approve for you?
Well, that's up to the committee, how they want to do it. The committee initially approved doing a survey, but they haven't, as a committee, looked at the final survey and approved it. So if the committee wanted to say, you know, we feel comfortable with what you've done, go forth, that's fine. If the committee wants to take a look at the survey, as I said, anything that delays it beyond our being able to approve it tomorrow night, we'll just push back the report date. So if we wait another week and have the committee look at it, then it's going to push back the timing another week.
Well, I would say the committee should have the ability to look at it before it goes to the public.
Yeah, well, that's up to the committee, whatever you prefer.
And the other thing, you said you talked to Jim Jascott. The questions that I would have for him is, when was the last time there was an assessment and when is the next one due? Because that will certainly change the scenarios, or could change the scenarios for the residential taxes.
No. He just gave us average prices and he gave us the information on bonding. We didn't look ahead to reassessment or anything like that.
I was just curious if anyone knew when the last assessment was and when the next assessment is due.
Yeah, I don't. That's
Rich?
Yeah, our last
yeah,
reval
Sylvia.
was before we built the budget. This last budget we're in now was based on the most recent.
I'm sorry,
reval.
Sean, I didn't hear you.
I was just answering the question on the revaluation.
Yeah.
It was in 2018, which is what we built the budget off of. The October 18 is what the current year budget is based off of.
And that's a 10-year reevaluation?
That's every 5 years.
Every 5 years. Okay, so 2023.
Okay, and that was going to be my question, because that's when all this will come to fruition, is 23, 24, 25. So I think that's a good observation on Matt's part, but I just would like to see the survey. I'm not sure I will have any discrepancy with it or disagreement with it, but I'd like to see it. I think if it's going out and the name of the committee, I think all of us on the committee should at least be able to see the survey before it goes.
Do we want to go through it quickly now, or is it something that we would email out to the committee, and then, because that's going to push us out another week if we have to wait till next week for approval?
Arnett, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think if we were to email it out, we still would need to meet to review to approve it at the next meeting, right? The approval can't come through email.
Yes, you would need a public action for approval.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's not in final form right now anyway. I think we need to meet tomorrow night as a committee to get it in final form, and then we can send it out to everyone at that time. So it's as I said, it's up to you. We could send it out. If you have questions or comments, you could do that. Or if you want a formal discussion and vote at the 26th, it'll just mean that the final report would be coming in
Week later.
around the 8th of March instead of the 1st of March. Which I have no problem with. It's just a matter of, you'll get that data right about the time that the town council and board of ed are considering the options. It looks like we're down to 2 options now. If we're presenting both to the town council and board of ed, it would give them some information on how people in town are looking at those options. Chuck?
So right now, if you were to send it out though, you wouldn't be getting it back to the first anyhow, right? So there wouldn't be time for any action to be taken on it for a presentation to the town council if we were to hold that date of the first. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah. If we were to
So
approve it tomorrow night and give CRPP the go-ahead, then they promised the report would be to us on March 1st.
So I would agree with others. If we could wait another week and maybe review it at the meeting on the 27th, have everybody have a chance to look at it, make sure there's no issues with the contents by the full committee. That would be what
I
I'd
had no
favor.
problem with that. And, that way Jim Jascott, his numbers and the numbers that we've calculated can also be clarified, make sure we're on the same page.
So Rich, I would suggest once you meet with them tomorrow, send it out, the final version out as soon as you get it to everybody. And then everyone can take a look at it before the meeting on the 27th. Get back to Rich with any questions or concerns that you have about it so that on the 27th, we can actually approve it. I would hate to meet on the 27th and then have people bring up concerns and then have to go back again and wait until the following meeting on the 1st to actually be able to approve it. So if people be proactive and review that before the 27th, have questions answered through email possibly, and then document those questions in the meeting of the 27th and then be able to approve it, that would be best solution.
Okay, sound good to everyone?
Yeah.
Sure.
I think we should have the benefit of everybody knowing everybody's comments on there though, right? If you're doing it through email, you'd have to copy everybody for freedom of information purposes. Is that right?
As long as our net is copied, right? Our net you documented.
Yeah, if you will reply all, it becomes a discussion and that becomes an issue. If someone gathers the comments and puts them together and then those comments can be distributed right before the meeting, the day before the meeting, that would be fine. And if people want to send me their comments, I can consolidate them and send them out to everybody before the.
So you want all the comments sent to you, Arnett?
Unless someone else would like to do it. I'm happy to do it. I know you all busy, but I'm happy to do it.
Yeah, well, I can do it, or people can send it to you with a CC to me, but I would like to get them as soon as I can so that I can.
Okay, then maybe it makes sense for them to go to you, Rich, and I'll work with you to make sure they get to the group.
All right, and I'll just put them all together and send it to you.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay. Rich, are you all set?
And the only other thing I'd say is we got, nice couple articles, a letter to the editor in this week's Cheshire Herald and something in the Meriden paper. We have a letter to the editor program that we've put together. Kate's got one hopefully coming out this week that deals with enrollment numbers at the elementary level. So keep looking for those. We're trying to get that out as much as possible. And Jim is working on doing some short videos that we're going to start getting out. So doing what we can to just try to get the word out, get as much detail out as we can until we actually have a particular, program that we can really start pushing. That's it.
Okay. Any questions for Rich? Okay, moving on to the next item, public comment. I believe we received a couple emails since our last meeting. John, where are you?
Right here.
You are, I see you. You're right here, but I still have to find you on my screen. So would you mind sharing the log? Thank you.
Not at all.
So
I believe the line 20 and line 21, Jen, were the two that have been received since the last meeting.
Okay.
Okay. Is that large enough?
It is large enough. I just don't know if I can see the whole column. Column E there is, I think, a little cut off. There we go. Oh,
There, okay,
perfect. Thank
there
you.
you go.
Okay, line number 20. I am writing to inquire about the Cheshire Public Schools modernization. I would like to know the modernization will all include, will there be central AC installed in all the schools? Since only Highland has central air, I believe it affects the students and teachers on hot summer days, and it's hard for students like my son to focus on class with it being so hot. I would like to know why what this modernization committee is working on and what will be modernized or added to our schools, please. So the answer to all of that is we're not sure yet. We will be addressing the HVAC systems in all of our renovations and builds and CIP, whatever it ends up being. But the best way to learn about what we're doing is really watching these meetings, reading the minutes, keeping updated on what we're doing and following along our Facebook page. And I really can't answer the rest of those questions specifically at this time, but we are looking at all of that. The next item is Rebecca Elliott. I am a town resident, a teacher at Cheshire High School, and I have 3 children at Highland. I saw your recent Facebook post about the agreement to move forward with 6 scenarios. I have a few thoughts and questions I would like to share. As a teacher in the high school, I was completely stunned to see that building a new high school isn't a top priority. The issues we experience with the physical structure and the learning environments are truly deplorable. It appears that the committee is starting at our second worst school building and turning their backs. Oh, staring at our second worst school building and turning our backs. The high school is too small. It doesn't meet our students' needs. It is in disrepair, and it can be easily argued that it needs too many changes.
Sorry, just trying to enlarge this for you.
That's okay. Thank you.
There you go.
No, too many changes to fix with remodeling alone. When the NEASC group came through, the topic of our physical structure deficits were noted frequently in their report. When I think about preparedness for post-secondary education and our career readiness, it is most important for our students to have access to modern learning conditions and resources at the high school level. We need to remain competitive with the high schools across the state so our students have equal or greater preparedness to excel after their time at CHS. I think many people would be interested in more information as well as the rationale behind moving a new high school from the list. I would be interested in learning more about how these modernization plans honor or reject our ability to follow through with the NEASC accreditations, 5 and 10-year check-ins. Has the Committee and Board of Education considered a K-8 model? There is tremendous research that has been conducted that indicates higher achievement in a K-8 model, and that would impact modernization possibilities. For instance, this article, I believe she linked an article there. Though I don't have personal experience yet, many of my neighbors have expressed discontent with the middle school programming here. Having a K-8 model would be great for families and students alike. Finally, I'm unsure how far and wide the committee has been sharing information about your work, but I have only seen updates via Facebook. I think the community is largely unaware of the true state of CHS beyond the facade. Perhaps mailers or broken down, easy to read charts can be published in the Cheshire Herald. Thanks for all of your hard work. A lot of stuff here. So I'm going to go backwards. As far as communication, we are working on that. We do have our Facebook page. We broadcast all of our meetings. Everything is very transparent and out there. You can watch all of our historical meetings. You can take a look at our website for all the links for everything. We are currently working on print things, so there'll be letters to the editors, Rich had mentioned. We are working on doing all sorts of other things for communication purposes. The K-8 model, I believe, was discussed early on, possibly even maybe a year ago at this point. I remember talking about it very, very early in this process. And I don't recall off the top of my head what was decided about that, but it is not one of the options that we are looking at right now. And then as far as the high school, again, we kind of talked about the issues there. They're actually, I know she mentioned in here that it's too small, but according to the data that Malona McBroom provided, we do have capacity for the students that are there. And starting with the high school, again, does not address our elementary enrollment needs, which is a critical issue that we have to address at this point. Doesn't mean we're not going to look at the high school. Whatever plan that we come up with will absolutely include a high school renovation or a build or something to address the high school. It just will happen in later phases. But as far as being able to start with the high school, that is something that our hands are tied with, and we can't really move forward with that option right now. I think I addressed all of the points and questions in there, but if there's anything else, feel free to email us back again, and I'm happy to discuss any other issues in here. Arnett, do we have any other comments through email at this point? You're muted. I'm looking, your head's shaking no, but
Is that better?
yeah, much, thank you.
Yes. There are no new comments received. Thank you.
Okay. Yes, Matt.
Would you like to comment on the meetings that you've had in the past week with Jim Jascott and I believe it was you and Chuck, and also the meetings that you had with some of the other, town people? Could you bring us up to date on that stuff, please?
I already did that in the beginning of the meeting under agenda item 4A. I discussed the fact that we had met with leaders of the town, town council chairperson, as well as the Board of Ed chairperson. And I talked about what we discussed. I'm not sure if you're talking or not, but you're muted.
Oh, I am. I'm sorry. I said I got on late. I was unfortunately detained, but I will go back and look at that. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else have anything? Okay. The next meeting will be a week from right now. So we will meet on January 27th at 7 p.m. and we will be reviewing the numbers from Jim Jascott, and we'll talk about scenarios 1A and 2A. We will also talk about the survey from Rich, and I think that'll be about it for the agenda. Anyone have anything else, or would anyone like to make a motion to adjourn? Is actually what I was asking.
Motion, so moved.
Thank you, Jeff. Second. Kate, I saw your hand. Thank you. All in favor? Okay, everyone have a nice night. Thank you very much for your time and attention and effort today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Jim.
Good night, everybody.
Thank you. Good night. See you tomorrow.